Okay, so you sent us a ton of research on aging, and it looks like we're diving deep into the world of bioelectricity this time.
Yeah,
Are you ready to get charged up about the latest in longevity science?
absolutely. I think it's a fascinating area.
So to get us started, we're going to be looking at a paper called Aging as a Morphostasis Defect, a developmental bioelectricity perspective.
Great paper.
And lucky for us, one of the authors is actually our expert for this deep dive, Dr. Michael Levin.
Happy to be here.
Your work has been featured in so many amazing places, like The New Yorker, for its potential to revolutionize how we think about the body.
It's really exciting work.
So we're going to be focusing on this new perspective on aging.
Okay.
It's kind of moving beyond the traditional wear and tear theories.
Right.
So could you explain a little bit about what that means?
Well, the idea is that aging might be more of a software problem than a hardware one.
Okay.
It's not just about damage accumulating, but about the body's ability to maintain its structure and organization over time. A concept called morphostasis.
Morphostasis. So it's like the body has this blueprint for staying young,
Yeah.
but that blueprint might get corrupted or lost as we age.
That's a great way to put it.
So what's the key to that blueprint?
Well, the key to that blueprint, the communication system that maintains it, is bioelectricity.
Bioelectricity. You know, I always thought of electricity as something happening mainly in the brain and nerves.
Yeah, that's what most people think.
Yeah.
But it's actually much more widespread than that. Every cell in our body has a resting electrical potential, a voltage across its membrane.
Really?
Yeah, it's almost like every cell is a tiny battery.
So every cell is generating electricity.
That's right.
That's wild. How does that actually work? What's creating all this electrical activity?
It all comes down to ion channels, pumps, and gap junctions.
Okay.
These proteins act like gatekeepers, controlling the flow of charged ions like sodium, potassium, and calcium across the cell membrane.
Interesting.
And it's this flow of ions that creates the electrical signals we're talking about.
So these ion channels and pumps are like tiny electrical circuits embedded in every cell.
You could say that.
Wow.
And the fascinating thing is that these circuits don't just operate in isolation.
Yeah.
They're interconnected, forming complex networks that span tissues and organs.
So it's like a hidden electrical language that cells use to communicate and coordinate their activities.
Precisely.
That's so cool.
And this language isn't just about sending messages from one cell to another.
Right.
It can actually control cell behavior, influencing things like cell migration, differentiation, and even growth.
So we're not just talking about tiny changes at the cellular level. This bioelectric communication can have large-scale effects on the body.
Absolutely. The paper provides some striking examples of how manipulating bioelectricity can lead to dramatic changes in development and regeneration.
Like what?
For instance, researchers have been able to correct brain defects in frogs by manipulating ion channels, essentially rewiring the brain to restore normal development.
So they're basically resetting the bioelectric patterns, and the body follows that corrected blueprint to fix the problem.
That's the idea.
That's amazing.
And it's not just limited to the brain. They've also used bioelectricity to induce limb regrowth in animals that normally don't regenerate like rats.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
Now I'm seeing how this bioelectric perspective really challenges our understanding of what's possible in biology. It's almost like we're rewriting the rules.
It is a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And it has profound implications for medicine.
How so?
Well, imagine harnessing bioelectricity to trigger the body's own repair mechanisms,
Yeah, okay.
potentially replacing or supplementing traditional approaches like drugs or surgery.
That's fascinating, but I'm curious about the specifics.
Sure.
How exactly does this bioelectric blueprint relate to the aging process? Is it literally fading away like ink on a page?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of the paper's core idea.
Okay.
As we age, there's a gradual decline in this morphostasis, the body's ability to maintain its shape and structure.
Oh.
This decline could be due to several factors.
So it's not just one thing going wrong, but potentially a combination of factors that contribute to this loss of bioelectric control.
Exactly. It could be that the bioelectric patterns themselves become corrupted over time, like static on a radio signal.
Interesting.
Or it could be that the cells become less responsive to those signals, like a radio with a weak antenna.
I see.
Either way, the result is the same. The body starts to lose its ability to repair and regenerate, leading to the visible signs of aging.
That makes sense. So we're seeing wrinkles, organ dysfunction, and all the other hallmarks of aging because the bioelectric communication that keeps everything in order is breaking down.
That's the hypothesis.
Okay.
Now, the question is, can we restore or enhance that communication to slow down or even reverse the aging process?
That's what I'm eager to explore, and I know there are some really exciting rejuvenation strategies being investigated.
Right.
I'm guessing bioelectricity might have something to do with those?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And there's a surprising connection between bioelectricity and some of the most promising approaches to rejuvenation being explored today.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's dive into these strategies and see how bioelectricity fits into the picture. What are some of the most interesting avenues being explored, and how do they connect back to this electrical language of the body?
Well, one approach that's gotten a lot of attention is the use of blood factors.
Oh, okay.
You've probably heard about the parabiosis experiments where they surgically connect the circulatory systems of a young mouse and an older mouse.
Yes. The older mouse seems to get a boost of vitality from the younger one's blood.
Right.
It's fascinating, but also a bit creepy.
It is a striking phenomenon. And what's interesting is that some of these youthful blood factors, like oxytocin, can actually regulate ion channels.
Really?
So they're directly influencing those bioelectric signals we've been talking about.
So even something like young blood, which seems so different from manipulating electrical signals, might be working its magic, at least in part, through bioelectricity.
It's certainly a possibility that researchers are actively investigating. Another approach involves manipulating metabolism.
Yep.
Things like dietary restriction and drugs like rapamycin have been shown to extend lifespan in various organisms.
The classic calorie restriction approach. I'm always curious about how those kinds of interventions work at a deeper level.
Right, and we're beginning to understand how they tie into bioelectricity.
Okay.
For example, mTOR, a key nutrient sensing pathway, also influences ion channels and autophagy, the cell's recycling system.
So by tweaking the body's energy usage, we might be indirectly affecting those bioelectric signals and potentially slowing down the aging process.
So that's the idea.
Yeah.
Then there are senolytics.
Senolytics.
These drugs target senescent cells, those zombie cells that have stopped dividing and contribute to aging.
Interesting.
And guess what? Some senolytics work by directly or indirectly affecting ion channels.
It seems like this bioelectricity connection is popping up everywhere. Even getting rid of those zombie cells might involve fine-tuning the body's electrical system.
It really is a central player. And finally, there's cellular reprogramming.
Okay.
This is where scientists can reprogram adult cells back to a stem cell-like state using what are called Yamanaka factors.
I've read about that. It's like turning back the clock on cells, right? Amazing, but potentially complex?
Precisely. And you guessed it, ion channels play a key role in regulating this reprogramming process.
Wow. So it seems like all these different approaches to rejuvenation, despite their different mechanisms, might all be converging on this idea of manipulating bioelectricity.
That's a very astute observation.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the potential power of this approach.
But what about specific age-related diseases? Does bioelectricity play a role there too?
Oh, absolutely.
We've talked about the big picture of aging, but I'm curious to know how this connects to things like heart disease, Alzheimer's, and even cancer.
In fact, disrupted bioelectricity might be a major factor in many age-related diseases.
Okay.
To understand why, we need to talk about something called channelopathies.
Channelopathies. That sounds a bit ominous. Tell me more.
Channelopathies are diseases caused by dysfunction of ion channels. Remember, those proteins responsible for creating those bioelectric signals.
Right, the gatekeepers of the cell's electrical system.
Exactly.
So if they're not working properly, that could throw off the entire network.
Exactly. And that can lead to a cascade of problems.
Okay.
Take cardiovascular disease, for example.
All right.
As we age, we see a decrease in the function of potassium channels in blood vessels, which can lead to hypertension.
So if those channels aren't working, the signals that would normally relax and widen blood vessels aren't getting through, leading to high blood pressure.
Precisely. And altered calcium channels can also impact heart rhythm, leading to arrhythmias.
Okay, so heart problems are definitely on the list. What about brain diseases like Alzheimer's?
Well, in the brain, dysfunctional calcium channels in neurons can impair memory and learning. And oxidative stress, which increases with age, can damage potassium channels, contributing to inflammation and neuronal death.
So those age-related cognitive declines we see might be linked back to those tiny ion channels not working properly.
It's a very real possibility.
Right.
And even cancer has connections to bioelectricity.
Oh, really?
It turns out that tumors often exhibit abnormal bioelectric signatures. It's almost like they've gone rogue from the body's control.
So they're not following the bioelectric blueprint anymore, growing out of control and potentially spreading.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the truly remarkable finding is that normalizing bioelectricity in tumors has been shown to suppress cancer growth in some cases.
That's incredible. So theoretically, if we could fix those bioelectric signals, we could rein in those rogue cells and potentially stop cancer in its tracks.
It's not that simple, of course.
Right.
But it highlights just how fundamental bioelectricity is to our health.
Yeah.
Not just in aging, but in a wide range of diseases.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see the bigger picture here. Bioelectricity is like this hidden language that governs so much of what happens in our bodies.
Yeah.
And when that language gets corrupted, things start to go wrong.
That's a great way to sum it up.
Yeah.
And the more we understand this language, the better equipped we'll be to fight disease and even slow down aging itself.
Speaking of slowing down aging, the paper mentioned an animal that seems to have cracked the code. The planarian.
Ah, yes, the planarian.
Yeah.
A truly remarkable creature.
They're known for their incredible regenerative abilities, but what makes them so special in the context of aging?
Well, these tiny flatworms can be cut into hundreds of pieces, and each piece will regrow into a whole new worm.
Oh no, it's crazy.
But here's the truly mind-blowing part. Planaria are essentially immortal.
Immortal! Seriously.
They defy typical aging processes.
Like they just keep on living forever.
It seems that way. They don't show the typical signs of aging that we see in other organisms.
That's incredible. And what's the connection to bioelectricity? Are they using it to somehow cheat death?
Well, research has shown that manipulating bioelectric signals in planaria can control things like head shape and even the number of heads they regenerate.
Wait, they can regenerate multiple heads? So they're basically using bioelectricity to control their entire body plan.
It seems so. And it's led scientists to wonder if studying these immortals could help us unlock the secrets to longer, healthier lives for humans.
That's where things get really exciting. Could these little worms hold the key to our own longevity?
It's certainly a possibility. And that brings us to the exciting world of morphoceuticals.
Morphoceuticals? That sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It's a pretty cool name, right?
Yeah.
Morphoceuticals are basically a new type of drug that targets the body's bioelectric software to kind of like guide growth and repair.
So instead of going after like individual molecules or genes, we're talking about influencing the electrical signals that govern how cells behave.
Exactly. The idea is to restore those signals to a more youthful state or enhance the body's ability to respond to them.
So it's like giving the body's electrical system a tune-up.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And the paper actually highlights a really interesting example.
Okay, what is it?
There's a drug called lamotrigine, which is already used to treat epilepsy.
Oh, wow. So a drug that's already out there being used for something completely different might have this hidden potential to act as a morphoceutical.
Yeah, that's what's so exciting. Researchers discovered that lamotrigine can also rescue brain defects in frogs by restoring normal bioelectric patterns.
So this epilepsy drug is essentially rewiring the brain to fix those defects. That's incredible. But how does that translate to aging? Could morphoceuticals really help us slow down or even reverse aging?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And it's definitely an area of active research. The idea is that by targeting bioelectricity, we might be able to address the underlying causes of aging, not just the symptoms.
That makes sense. But I imagine there are some pretty significant challenges in developing these morphoceuticals. After all, we're talking about manipulating a system that's super complex and still not fully understood.
Oh, you're absolutely right. One of the biggest challenges is figuring out how these bioelectric patterns change as we age and how they differ between individuals.
Yeah, because everyone's bioelectric fingerprint is unique, right?
Exactly. And those patterns are constantly changing, responding to everything from our environment to our genetics. It's a dynamic system, not a static one.
So how are scientists even approaching this? It seems incredibly difficult.
It is. But researchers are using all sorts of cutting-edge techniques, including things like computational modeling and high-throughput screening, to identify promising drug candidates.
So big data, computer science, and biology all working together to crack this code.
Exactly. And it's already leading to some exciting discoveries. But of course, safety is paramount. We don't want to accidentally disrupt essential bioelectric signals while trying to fix others.
Right, we don't want to end up like rewiring the brain in some unintended way.
Precisely. That's why this research is so meticulous and carefully controlled.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential of morphoceuticals to address aging. But the paper also mentioned their possible role in treating specific age-related diseases.
Right.
Can you give us some examples of how that might work?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's start with cardiovascular disease. As we age, the electrical signals that control our heart and blood vessels can become dysregulated, leading to problems like hypertension and arrhythmias.
Like those channelopathies we were talking about earlier, those ion channel dysfunctions
Exactly.
that can really mess up the cardiovascular system.
Right. So morphoceuticals could potentially be used to kind of restore those signals, improve heart function, and reduce the risk of heart attacks and strokes.
That would be amazing for so many people.
It really would. And then there's Alzheimer's disease, a truly devastating condition.
Yeah.
Characterized by a buildup of amyloid plaques and tau tangles in the brain.
And those plaques and tangles lead to all those cognitive problems, right? Memory loss, confusion.
Exactly. And it turns out that those amyloid plaques can actually disrupt bioelectric signaling in the brain.
Really?
Contributing to neuronal death and cognitive decline.
So it's like those plaques are messing with the brain's communication system, causing those electrical signals to go haywire.
That's a good way to think about it. So researchers are looking into whether morphoceuticals could be used to clear those plaques or protect neurons from their harmful effects.
Interesting.
Potentially slowing down or even halting the progression of Alzheimer's.
So instead of just managing the symptoms, we might be able to go after the root cause of the disease by restoring those bioelectric signals.
That's the hope. And even cancer, as we discussed earlier, has connections to bioelectricity.
Right.
Tumors often exhibit abnormal bioelectric signatures, essentially going rogue from the body's control system.
Like rebellious teenagers.
I like that analogy. So researchers are exploring whether morphoceuticals could be used to disrupt those rogue signals, essentially cutting off the tumor's communication lines and preventing it from growing or spreading.
So it's like using bioelectricity to shut down the tumor's command center.
Yeah, something like that. And while this research is still in its early stages, the potential is enormous.
It seems like we're on the cusp of a major paradigm shift in medicine, moving from a focus on treating symptoms to actually addressing the underlying causes of disease by targeting bioelectricity.
That's a great way to put it. It's about understanding and manipulating the body's software, its bioelectric code, to restore health and vitality.
It's a pretty exciting time to be alive, wouldn't you say?
I would. And who knows what amazing discoveries await us as we delve deeper into this electrifying field.
Speaking of amazing discoveries, we keep circling back to those incredible planarians.
Yeah.
We've talked about their remarkable regenerative abilities and their seeming immortality. But how does their mastery of bioelectricity translate into these almost magical powers?
Well, planarians are like nature's master electricians.
Okay.
They've evolved to use bioelectricity in ways that we're only just beginning to understand.
So they're not just using it for basic cellular communication, they've taken it to like a whole other level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Studies have shown that manipulating bioelectric signals in planaria can control not just their regeneration, but also their overall body shape.
Yeah.
They can literally reshape themselves using electricity.
So it's like they're using bioelectricity to sculpt their bodies. That's wild. But how does that connect to their apparent immortality?
Well, think about it. If you can constantly regenerate and reshape your body, you're essentially staying young forever. You're continuously repairing damage and maintaining your optimal form.
I mean, that's the dream, right? To have that level of control over our bodies, to be able to regenerate and repair any damage, essentially hitting the reset button on aging. But how realistic is it to think that we could ever achieve that level of regeneration in humans? We're talking about growing back entire limbs.
I understand your skepticism. And it's true that humans are much more complex organisms than planaria. But there are actually some encouraging signs that we might have more regenerative potential than we realize.
Really? What kind of signs are we seeing?
Well, for starters, our bodies already possess some regenerative capabilities. Our skin constantly renews itself. Our bones can heal after fractures, and our livers can regenerate after damage.
Okay, so those are all examples of regeneration, just on a smaller scale than what we see in planaria.
Exactly. And what's exciting is that researchers are starting to uncover the bioelectric signals that control those processes.
So maybe by understanding and manipulating those signals, we could amplify our own regenerative abilities, taking a page from the planarian playbook.
That's the hope. And there are already some promising experiments happening in this area.
Like what?
For example, researchers have been able to stimulate limb regrowth in mice by manipulating bioelectric signals.
Wait, seriously, they're growing back limbs in mice. That's insane.
It is. And while we're still a long way from regenerating human limbs, these experiments show that it's not entirely science fiction.
This is blowing my mind. It seems like bioelectricity is not just a key to understanding aging, but also a potential tool for unlocking incredible regenerative abilities.
That's a great way to put it. Bioelectricity is not just about sparks and signals. It's about the language of life, the code that governs how our bodies are built, maintained, and repaired.
Yeah.
And as we learn to decipher that code, we might just unlock the secrets to a longer, healthier, and more generative future.
It's an electrifying thought, isn't it?
It is. And it reminds us that even in the face of aging, the human body is capable of extraordinary things. We just need to learn how to tap into its full potential.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Right.
But we're not done yet. In our final segment, we're going to explore some even more mind-bending ideas about bioelectricity, including its potential role in consciousness and evolution. Stay tuned. It's wild how this whole conversation about bioelectricity and aging has led us to these big questions about consciousness and evolution.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, isn't it?
Like we went from tiny ion channels to what it means to be alive. So how does bioelectricity relate to consciousness? It's like a connection I never really made before.
Well, it's definitely a complicated area and a little bit controversial.
Right.
But some scientists think that bioelectricity could be really important for consciousness.
Okay.
The idea is that these bioelectric signals, the same ones that we've been talking about in cells and tissues, could be the foundation for our thoughts, feelings, and experiences.
So are you saying that those tiny electrical impulses are what create our sense of self? That's a pretty mind-blowing idea.
It is mind-blowing, but think of it this way. Our brain is this super intricate electrical circuit.
Yeah.
And consciousness, with all of its complexity, might emerge from that circuitry.
Okay, I see how that could be possible, but is there any evidence to support this idea?
There is some interesting research that hints at a connection.
Okay.
For example, studies have shown that changes in brainwave activity, which is basically just measuring the bioelectricity in the brain, are connected to different states of consciousness.
Okay, so when we're sleeping versus awake, our brainwave patterns change.
Right.
And those changes might reflect changes in our conscious experience.
Yeah, exactly. And even more interesting are experiments where researchers have used electrical stimulation to make people have specific thoughts or feelings.
So they're messing with the bioelectricity in the brain to create conscious experiences. That's amazing and a little bit scary. What does that even mean?
It definitely raises some deep questions about the connection between the mind and the body, free will, and even the possibility of creating artificial consciousness.
Wow, we've gone deep down the rabbit hole. It's pretty crazy to think that we might actually be able to understand consciousness in a whole new way.
It's a new frontier to explore, for sure. Now, you mentioned evolution earlier, and I'm curious how you see bioelectricity fitting into that story.
Well, the paper we've been looking at focuses mostly on aging.
Right.
But I've read other research suggesting that bioelectricity might have been super important for complex life to evolve.
That's a cool connection, and it makes sense when you think about how old bioelectricity is. It's been around way longer than neurons or brains.
Yeah. Single-celled organisms use bioelectricity to talk to each other and to respond to their environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the idea is that as life evolved, those simple bioelectric signaling systems became more complex over time and eventually led to nervous systems and brains.
So it's like evolution took this basic building block, the bioelectric communication system, and kept building on it over millions of years.
I like that analogy. And some scientists even think that bioelectricity might have been what allowed multicellularity to evolve in the first place.
Hey, what? How could bioelectricity create multicellular organisms? That seems like a big jump.
Remember those gap junctions we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
The protein channels that allow cells to share electrical signals.
They're like communication bridges between cells.
Exactly. So the idea is that those gap junctions let single-celled organisms start working together, sharing information and coordinating their actions.
So instead of being individuals, they started acting like a group, guided by these bioelectric signals.
That's the idea. And over time, those groups became more integrated and eventually formed true multicellular organisms.
That's incredible. It's like bioelectricity was what held those early organisms together, so all the complex life we see today could evolve.
It's a really cool idea. And it just goes to show how important bioelectricity is to life itself, from those first single-celled organisms to all the incredible diversity and complexity we see in the living world today.
This whole deep dive started with aging, but now we're talking about consciousness and evolution. It's amazing how bioelectricity connects everything.
It is a beautiful example of how all these different areas of science are connected. And that's what makes scientific exploration so rewarding.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into bioelectricity, what's the main thing you hope our listeners take away from this?
I think the most important thing to remember is that bioelectricity isn't just an abstract scientific idea. It's the language of life, the code behind everything from our cells to our thoughts. And as we learn to understand and manipulate that code, we might just find the keys to a healthier, longer, and more amazing future.
I love that. It's such a powerful reminder that we're really just beginning to understand this incredible force that drives all of us. And to our listeners, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those bioelectric signals flowing. Who knows what incredible discoveries are waiting for us? This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.